We are looking at table principle number 9, and this one is really focused in around transition and change. How different team members approach transition and change, and why we need both of those approaches. As we look at this principle, we are also going to be asking ourselves that same question. How do I grow, protect, represent the things that I'm learning from this principle so my team is stronger, so my organization is stronger, so we develop that culture that we want where people can do relevant work and we can leverage one another's strengths. So principle number 9 is this: chaotic paths, chaos and order colliding, are a valuable part of the journey. Chaotic paths are a valuable part of the journey. So think back to a time where you have moved from one place to another. And there's the packing up, and you're living then in those last couple of days before moving, you're living out of boxes and it's feeling kind of chaotic. And then there's moving day, and there literally is a lot of moving pieces happening at that time, and that can have its own intensity with that. And then there's the unpacking. Chaotic means that there's chaos that's happening, but it's chaos that has some purpose. It's chaos that's going to move to order. Remember that with that move, there might have been some anticipation, excitement, nervousness, stress, all of those different emotions. And but you know that you're going to move from, what it feels chaotic to something that has a sense of order, where things have a place and they belong. You're moving, though, from what is known to something that you don't quite know yet. And so there's a lot of different feelings that can go with that. That middle transition, I sometimes call that chaotic. And sometimes we want to just avoid it. And yet with changes and transitions, that can be a time where we really begin to discover resources, but also things about ourselves and our teammates and their individual and natural strengths that we didn't know otherwise. So for some people, transitions and change can feel a little bit more intense and less desirable. For others, transitions and changes are intriguing. They maybe are energizing, and they inspire new ideas. All right. So when I hear people say change is hard for everyone and nobody likes change, I'm always like, oh no, let's not label it that way, because there are some that would prefer to have things the same, but there are some that are naturally built to want to explore, to want to have those adventures, and transitions and changes, even however small, can provide that for them. For those that that middle time holds a little bit more intensity, I want to speak to you first. When your teams are going through transitions, and there you start to feel that intensity and maybe feel a higher level of stress, I want you to think back to a few different things. One, asking yourself, what can you control in the transition or change? What can't you control? And then what can you influence? And this can be a place where you can kind of reset. So when you have to have these conversations at work around change or transition, you're very clear on what you can't control, but what you can control, and also what you can influence, and putting more energy into what you can influence and in control for the greater good of the team. Not for your own greater good, but for the greater good of the team. I want to remind you that when we are in the middle of a transition and it feels very chaotic, hold on, because what's going to happen is we are going to be getting into deep weed strategies and logistics where we really need your concrete thinking during that time. But be willing to let those that see this chaotic phase, this middle and are energized by it to leverage their strengths in that. I want to also encourage you that when you are feeling that intensity, to be asking questions. Because if there's a lot of ideas flying around, you might feel like, oh, I can't keep up with this. Ask questions, but be aware of your tone and your intent with the question. Because even if an idea seems crazy to you, it might be the very thing that's going to get your team from moving from not being relevant to being relevant. And so trust your team members that are thinking in that creative realm, but also trust yourself when you need those questions answered. Just make sure that you're using a tone and intent that says, I'm learning, but I also need this information, okay? Now I want to speak to those of you that look at change and transition and go, I'm kind of interested about this. I want you to show yourself trustworthy to your team. Because sometimes what can happen is for those that are thrive in that middle or in that that chaotic space, is the ideas can be gumming and being flying so fast that we forget the experience of the rest of the team. And so make sure that there is some sense of order to the ideas, and that you're also asking questions, curious questions, to those that are going to look at things a little bit more concrete, and be able to gain their insight into it. So you as a team are approaching this transition and change, leveraging the strengths from both parts that show up. And so here are some culture questions to be asking yourself, or maybe to use as reflection personally. Are you currently experiencing a transition, either individually or as a team? You know, is there a transition that's happening right now that feels chaotic? And remember, chaotic is that confidence that it may feel chaotic right now, but you know it's going to move to order. Now here's a different question. Are you experiencing a transition or a change that feels like chaos? Because that's a different experience. Chaos is typically a mess in the middle that has no hope of, or feels like it has no hope of moving forward. And so as leaders, part of our job when we're going through transitions and changes with our teams is to name and acknowledge where it feels chaotic, but assure that we are moving towards order. Another question is one that I raised earlier, is what can I control and influence in this situation? So when I ask you the question, am I currently experiencing a transition or a change? Then being able to ask, what can I control? What can I influence in this situation? Where do I find myself most comfortable during transition? Is it in the creative designing and the idea forming? Or is it more in the concrete strategies and logistics? So where do I find myself more comfortable? Am I more comfortable during transition and change in that creative designing and idea forming, or more in the concrete logistics and strategies? If you can even name that as a team and say, hey, I'm more concrete. Hey, I'm in ideas, I want to drop ideas. Don't pigeonhole, one another with those things, because there's going to be different mixes of it. But it helps to acknowledge, to know that, wow, that person is maybe wants to have more of the concrete piece. And so I make sure that that they get that. But also that person who really is that idea dropper, to give them space to be able to also leverage that strength. And then another question to ask is, what transitions have I successfully made in the past? that felt chaotic but moved to order. So what transitions have you made, either personally or professionally, in the past that felt chaotic but did move to order? See, it's important for us to take a look back and get assured by history that we can do hard things, that we can make it through transitions and change. But let's do it with intention. Let's also use our past as a resource to say, what helped me get through that? What were resources, people, strategies that I used to get through that transition that moved to order? And then see if those might be useful for you now during a transition. And then final question is, how can I support others during a transition in ways that build trust? How can I support others during a transition in ways that build trust? During transitions and changes, sometimes those of us that get excited about change and transition can end up leaving others in the dust. And we can move forward more quickly than we should be moving forward. And in that, we can damage trust without even meaning to, or even being aware of it. So be thinking about the transitions and changes that inevitably are going to happen. If you're not in the middle of one right now, you will be at some point, right? Because, you know, life changes, work changes. But be asking yourself, how can you show up to support others during a transition in ways that build trust? As we do that, we are going to grow and we are going to protect a culture of good. But we also are going to represent to maybe even other teams in our organization or to other organizations. This is how you do it. This is how you go through transitions and do it with building trust.